introduce Christopher Maider. Christopher Maider, aside from being the Worcester Tea Party's Dean of Journalism, aside from being the editor of the Lexington Green blog, aside from being the host and producer of the Meat and Potatoes radio show, not only is he my dear friend, but he is also the strongest activist I have ever known. It is my pleasure to introduce Christopher Maider.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks a lot. It's astounding what he said about racism. He went on to talk about Merriam-Webster, and he went on to talk about how racism has formulated into a 20th century type of concept. It was Trotsky who came up with the term racist and racism. And what it basically meant was, during, of course, the Bolshevik Revolution, takeover of Russia from the communists and everything, they tried to expand into the Siberian area. Well, what's out in Siberia? All the tribes, all the natives. And they tried to get out there and tried to introduce communism out there. And of course the natives were like, what are you talking about? Get out of here. You know, we want to hunt our elk and just live in the woods and leave us alone. What did one former president say during the campaign? They clung viciously to their religion and their guns. That's when Trotsky came up with the term, these people are racist. They're sticking to their race. They're not adopting this communist manifesto that is going to usher in this great new century of prosperity. These people are racist. So Matt is very correct in saying that it's a very uniquely 20th century term. Regardless of the various definitions from Merriam-Webster, and you can look in different cultures of what racism actually means, always go back to, sadly, you have to go back to the Bolshevik Revolution. You have to go back to the Communist Revolution. It actually really started there, and unfortunately, here in 2017, and what happened in 1917? Here we are in 2017, still feeling the effects of communism, Bolshevism, racism. All of it a manufacturing, all of it a manipulation, all of it, quote unquote, invented. This is what is very important to understand about this, is all of this has to be manufactured. I've said this many times on my radio show, everything from the left, everything that happens, please don't take this the wrong way, the gay agenda, feminist agenda, this alliance, that alliance, whatever you, writ large, whatever, pick your poison. All of it has to be manufactured, constantly fomented, constantly agitated, constantly stirred up. It's like a big giant political blender out there somewhere, just constantly stirring it up. It has to be manufactured. Things like conservatism, things like the Worcester Tea Party, are just natural organic things that grow over time. Either you're raised that way, or you come into it over time as you get older. Sometimes even if you're younger, you might read something or learn something, and a light goes off in your head. These are organic processes. And these are natural processes, and these are healthy processes. This is why a conservative type movement, don't get me wrong when I say that, I'm not talking about ultra-right. I'm not talking about, in fact, I'm not even really talking about flag, God, king, and country. I'm talking about just simple, I'm not going to live my life like some radical nutbag out there. I'm going to live my life the correct way and try to be the best citizen I can. These are organic things that happen naturally. Again, leftism is something that has to be manufactured. One of the things I want to talk about is a mass psychosis that is going on out there in our society right now. Tell me, please, you guys must know what I'm talking about. Just turn on the news. You gotta admit, it is a mass psychosis. The entire nation has gone bonkers, apeshit, right? They've gone crazy. I say that euphemistically, though. Obviously not the entire nation, or there'd be like people fighting in the streets and bricks coming through the window.
That's next week.
No.
Eventually, sure, exactly, right, eventually. But we're getting close. Let's take in case in point things like Ferguson. I know we want to talk about, we'll talk about Charlotte, we'll talk about Boston in a couple of seconds. Let's go back to like Ferguson. Let's go back to the Rodney King riots.
Yeah.
Things like that. These not, I don't want to say they were the seeds of it, they were kind of like the sprouts of it all. Where you saw elements of society just completely lose it. And off of a tiny bit of information and a pound of obscure, they completely went off the rails. What is very interesting to know is, let me go back a little bit to what you said about racism. In December 1917, Lenin appointed Felix Dzerzhinsky as Commissar for Internal Affairs and head of all Russian Extraordinary Commission for Combating Counter-Revolution and Sabotage, better known as Cheka. Anybody who knows anything about communism and former Soviet Union, Cheka was a very nasty organization. And as the Russian Revolution took hold that cold winter, good old Felix and his buddies understood the importance of manipulation and manipulation of media. And even though modern media didn't exist yet, they understood the importance of propaganda, what is known today as agitprop, agitation propaganda, agitprop. Felix goes on to say, quote, "Do not think that I am in the lookout for forms of revolutionary justice," which is what the left is calling for today. They're talking about social justice, yada yada. Dzerzhinsky completely in 1917 debunked and disregarded this. We have no need for justice now. And in the following summer, in 1918, we stand for organized terror. And this should be frankly admitted. Terror is an absolute necessity during times of revolution. Our aim is to fight against the enemies of the New World Order. This was in 1918 in Russia. Think about what happened later on in Russia during all those times. The rioting, the rounding up of everybody. What is interesting to know, in the 1970s, Yuri Bezmenov, a former KGB agent, came on a television program. This was back in the 70s. I got it somewhere in my YouTube archives. It's an old grainy film. It's about an hour-long interview. And he goes on to talk about how these very riots that you're seeing right now, what happened in Boston, what you saw in Ferguson, what you saw in Charlottesville, what you saw in Baltimore. Again, pick any city, pick any poison. All useful for this one movement of communism. And what Yuri Bezmenov went on to say is that even though you've got the Al Sharptons and the Jane Fondas and all these people and the Madonnas and everybody else standing up there and their microphones talking about it and how they're going to stand up and fight and we want a new country and this, that, the other thing. Yuri Bezmenov said, when we take over, even they will be taken to the gulag. Because what Yuri Bezmenov went on to say is that when they, the Jane Fondas and the Al Sharptons and everybody else, find out what the real communism is about, what the real totalitarianism is about, they'll be the first to say, wait a minute, this isn't what we signed up for. So they need to be the first to be rounded up and taken away. We all know that very famous term from World War II, used for idiots. Or was it Mussolini, I think, was coined it? I could be wrong on that. Doesn't it? Stalin, yeah. Well, either way, Stalin, Mussolini, Hitler's youth, everybody. Think about it. Think about it. Doesn't matter. These idiots out here right now, doing it. They're all useful idiots. And God forbid if the time comes when there is that ultimate takeover, it's going to make the Jewish Holocaust look like a picnic. Because there's so many more, simply because of population-wise. I want to thank Matt for saying that. I want to go on, switch gears a little bit. My good friend Gary and I have spoken on my radio show and on his show, Freedom Network. We have slight political disagreements over our president. One of the things I want to talk about, and it's kind of in a segue to the mass psychosis that I introduced this piece as. It's what is called as Trump Derangement Syndrome. I had the great pleasure of writing an op-ed piece for Worcester magazine, and Walter Bird and Tom Quinn was so gracious to publish that piece. A paid person on the staff, Janice Harvey, basically excoriated Trump. And it's not just excoriating him. What really tripped my trigger was how she labeled us all, not just a basket of deplorables, but quite literally, she used the analogy of the Trump support. We're all at the beach. The lifeguard shouts a shark warning. The normal people get out of the water, but all the Trump supporters stay in the water and swim around. And so what she was going on to say is that no matter what Trump says, no matter the bloviating, everything else, and I get it, guys, I get it. She's like, all you Trump supporters, you just keep going back in the water. And what I want to tell her about is it's like, you've got to understand something that, you know, when you're talking about 62 million plus or minus people that actually voted in the popular election for Trump, to sit there and say that all of these people are insane, you're equating what Hillary Clinton said about we're a basket of deplorables, which just, that torpedoed her entire campaign. And this is why I had to write back when I read that Janice Harvey had said that, you know, we're all idiots, we're like swimming with sharks. It's like, look, you don't understand. Here we go. So you don't understand the mentality of not only just a Trump supporter, but really an average American. Americans who were sick and tired and fed up and decided to go with something different. They also didn't understand a very simple thing that had happened over the past several years since 2010, that the entire Electoral College had completely changed. 1,200 plus or minus seats lost entirely across the country, from Democrats to Republicans. I mean, we're talking governors, state legislatures, everybody, all the way down to mayors, selectmen, postmen, dog catcher, all across the country. The entire Electoral College swung. And what she went on also to say is that all of these people must somehow either have she didn't use that exactly, but there must be something absolutely wrong with these people. And I went on to, in my op-ed, to say, really, you're basically insulting 62 plus million Americans. Never mind the other types of Americans who either support but didn't vote. I'm gonna actually throw a number out there: 100 million plus, or minus. Then Ray Mariano, former mayor of Worcester magazine, writes an article, basically saying the same thing in the Worcester Sun, and I wrote a piece on my blog site, on my Facebook page, on my MNP Conservative Media Network page. And he basically went on to say basically almost the same things. But I want to read a little section right here. He went on to talk about how Trump not only is incompetent, unfit, mental, crazy, yada yada. One of the things I had said in my piece is like, it's all well and good to say that, Ray. Oh, Trump colluded with the Russians. Okay, great. How? Show me how. Don't just sit there and keep talking about it. How? Where's the show me how it happened? Nobody has. 9+ months, nothing, zero. Every time they get somebody else up there in those Senate Select Committee, oh, we've got him now. So-and-so is going to testify tomorrow. The press goes crazy and they get up there and they say, no, never met any Russian senator. No, sorry, Congressman. Nope, didn't take that phone call, sorry. Time and time and time and time and time and time again. It's a derangement. It's a syndrome. We didn't even see this during Obama. Now, we can all sit there and talk about how we all disagree with Obama's policy. Please, believe me. My entire radio show from '08 to '16 was based on that. Based on that. I never ever remember this type of insanity that was out there. Never remember it. We just simply disagreed. We fought against it. I just said 1,200 seats since 2010 lost by Democrats. We did it the way we're supposed to do it. We're supposed to stand up, organize, get ourselves together, get people elected. That's how we did it. That's how we fought the policies. Right now it's all derangement. But he goes on to talk about the emoluments clause, because somehow people don't understand the concept that Donald Trump is a very wealthy man and he made his money just because he's a businessman. He's an international businessman. And he wants to impeach Trump. Ray Mariano, former mayor of Worcester, wants to impeach Trump on the emoluments clause. Before I get into what I'm going to read here, you want to talk about somebody who violated the emoluments clause. Okay? Okay? The Clinton Foundation. Hello? Come on here.
Yeah, we're on.
All right? So I go on and I say, not sure exactly how Trump violates the emolument clause there, Ray. He turned over all control of his companies to his children during the election, so go talk to them. Besides, they are private, his children are private citizens, and they can do business with whoever they choose to do business with. It's just like the Russian hysteria. Even if Trump did communicate with the Russians while running for president, he has every right to do so. There is no law for a private citizen to speak to a foreign government or a foreign agency, or happens all the time, especially if you're an international businessman. And that's your job, to do international business with international countries and people. Obviously, you at some point in time have to talk to these nationals. And again, you want to look for violations of the emoluments clause, you go right ahead and talk to the Clinton Foundation. And a common analogy with this Trump Derangement Syndrome, it can be summed up like this. Liberals do not take Trump seriously. Liberals take Trump literally. Trump supporters don't take him literally. But Trump supporters take him very, very seriously. Next time, list specific reasons to impeach President Trump. We hear this all the time. Did you hear Maxine Waters on The View several weeks ago? She has absolutely zero concept of not only the impeachment process, but the succession of the presidency should that happen. But yet everybody on The View was like, yes, oh, isn't that wonderful? This is what I mean about that mass psychosis. It's a mass psychosis out there. Nobody gets it. It's really strange. It's really bad. Actually list the high crimes and misdemeanors that Trump is responsible for. Short of that, you have nothing except how you feel. And that doesn't cut it. And let's hear about how Trump colluded with the Russians. The constant hateful rhetoric towards President Trump is disgraceful. Even President Obama never experienced this, and if he did, it was marginalized, ignored, and the press gave it scant mentionings. Leftists and all they stand for, conversely, the support of the president, it holds steady. And this is another thing that Ray went on to say, and don't worry, I'm ending you soon. This is another thing that Ray went on to say. The polls sit there and constantly lie. Oh, this poll's in 30%. Oh, that's the worst rating since George Bush, blah, blah, blah. Trump just held a rally today in Arizona. I think there were over 15,000 people. He went to a Boy Scout rally several weeks, months ago. 50,000 people. I remember during the election, I went to two of them, and standing room only, tens of thousands of people. And these are the things that people like Ray Mariano, Janice Harvey of the Worcester magazine, and these crazies out here that don't get it. But there's a far larger audience out there supporting our president, a far more saner audience that is out there. You know, we are not those useful idiots. And I ended my piece in Worcester magazine by saying that Trump supporters don't go back in the water because we're crazy. and there's a shark warning. Trump supporters go back in the water because Trump supporters aren't afraid of the sharks. Thank you.